All right, thank you for staying with Daybreak. We're about to get in touch with Tony Watima, as an independent economist. But before we do that, let me bring to your attention a story that we're following here very closely. The Namanga border standoff between Kenya and Tanzania has erupted yet again. Now, barely 2 weeks after the two governments agreed on a protocol to test the truck drivers there, the two countries now seem to have flouted the deal, with each pointing an accusing finger at the other. The dispute now leading to trucks to pile up at the border town of Namanga right now as we speak. So Londigo District Commissioner in Tanzania's Arusha region, Frank Mwaisumbe, is now calling for the closure of the border once again, accusing Kenya of reneging of all the deal that allowed COVID-19 free certificate issued by either of the countries.
Tuko tayari, kama jambo hili halitaendelea basi tufunge mpaka kabisa, na kama vinginevyo basi watu wote wanaoagiza mizigo upande wa Tanzania waichukue mizigo katika upande wa Tanzania OSBP, na sisi tutachukua mizigo upande wa Namanga, kwa maana hatutaingia Kenya, ili tuweze kuto kuingiliana tena na shughuli ziweze kuendelea katika kila upande.
All right. So joining me now is Tony Watima, is an economist, and we're talking at a time when there's a loss of 28 to 50 billion shillings per month for the next 2 years. That's according to the Institute of Economic Affairs. Tony, thanks for making time for us. Now, so I'm looking at the newspaper headlines, and all I see is mostly doom and gloom. Over 1 million rendered jobless as COVID-19 takes a toll on businesses. Kenya still remains at 36% in terms of poor population. We recently saw an economic stimulus package by the president, about 53.7 billion shillings. How come people have not been able to reap the benefits?
Thank you for having me. That's a very big question. We talk about the impact of the stimulus package that you questioned. The problem is that the stimulus package, and looking at the impact of COVID-19, is that the impact is quite severe compared to what the response we're giving. So if you're talking about losing 28 billion to a top of 50 billion, that is only the direct impact. There is an indirect impact of people losing jobs every day. There is a direct impact of people who depend on those who are salaried cannot be able to receive what they receive at the end of the month, people in rural areas. So the severe impact of COVID is quite pervasive, and we expected to see a government reaction that comes in terms of trying to stem the impact, trying to shield Kenyans, especially from economic shocks and income shocks, that we'll expect to see government coming more with a program that is more around, it's made around 200 billion is what we expected that government would respond to that extent. That one is where we can say that government was trying to put, to stem the economic shocks that we're seeing from COVID-19.
So essentially you're saying these interventions right now as we speak are more like a drop in the ocean, considering there's a bigger economy to deal with?
Yes, that's true. Because you look at many economies the way they've suffered, especially if you're cutting supply chains, it means people are not be able to trade. If you talk about lockdown effects, business are not trading more. You talk about companies that have been rendered without cash flow. So they are able to, they have no option but to close down or to downsize. Those are severe economic shocks to an economy. So if you're doing on a scale of on a system scale, you look at the whole country, that is a severe shock that many economies have never suffered in modern times. So we expected that the only person who can come out at this time to try and create that shock absorber is government. But the response that we're seeing from government is not as a response that we say is stabilizing the economy. So in these times, we need to have a stabilization plan as we try to figure out how we get our way out of this COVID-19 is when you can talk about economic growth. But stabilization should be the main way that government should be looking at a strategy about stabilization of the economy.
And what would be the best strategy for stabilization from an economist perspective?
I think one of the main things from looking at the macroeconomy is that the problem we have basically from COVID-19 is an income shock. So we find that businesses are not being able to have revenues that are used to before. We find people have been rendered jobless. So the problem is that people don't have income to trade. And you find that supply chains have been cut. So people who are in business are not able to manufacture the way they want or to produce the goods the way you want. So we expected that government, as many governments have responded, is that we'll try and come with a stimulus package that helps business within afloat, whether through a loan, through banks, or find the other alternative apart from businesses is find people who are losing income or people who have lost income and try to make them that they have some income coming from government. So we are talking about disbursement of cash to individuals, and mostly the biggest investment is trying to stabilize companies that have lost cash flows and giving them cash flows that they're able to remain afloat, so that by the time we get to trying to recover, maybe you have a vaccine, that's where we take a trajectory of stabilization of the economy and growth, we are able to revive these companies better. But for now, we are seeing only companies going out. So in the labor market, we find that everyone is moving out of the labor market. But there is no stabilization plan from government to stop people from losing jobs or businesses closing down. That is the biggest effect of the economy.
Now, this is the tough balancing act that the government now has, because disbursement of cash that you're talking about, they've started that, and also trying to resuscitate the industries that is probably on a dip right now. For example, there's about 4 billion shillings or 3 billion shillings put aside for the hotel industry. Is that the best way to sort of give them a cushion, considering right now they're operating at zero occupancy?
Okay, let's start with cash disbursement. With cash disbursement, we're talking about 3 to 4 billion. That is a drop in the ocean on the terms of things we're talking about. Because look at previously, before COVID, government used to distribute around 4 billion there for vulnerable people. We talk about elderly and orphans and people who are classified as vulnerable. Right now, we are talking about, I think we've seen reports, 200,000 jobs have been lost from January to March. We didn't even see the economic effects, the direct economic effects of COVID in Kenya. So we are talking about probably more numbers have lost jobs. Those are not people that we are targeting with 4 billion. 4 billion is very little money for people that we're talking about. So we needed a proper cash program that serves a lot of people. We're talking about probably by the time we get to September, we might lose probably 1 million jobs. What is the government now doing? Because we cannot say that 4 billion will go to around servicing for around 1 million people. So looking at that, is that government is not responding very well from that end of income. But looking at the other question that you say about tourism, my reservation is that, and from an economic basis, is that when you, as government, when you have money, especially resources, you look at what's the best way to put it at that time that you can get the best economic impact. Because the other concept is about opportunity cost. If you're not investing in that, where can you invest better? If you talk about tourism is being given that kind of money, where will the tourists come from to stabilize that sector? Because we are talking about travels probably coming next year, not even this year. Will government subsidize hotels till next year? That's the question. Because the other way to look at it is government should stabilize supply chains of hotels, because those are the people who live markets, not the hotel itself, but people who supply those hotels. Because hotels will not have occupancy any day from now. But those are the people who provide the impact to those sectors, people who supply to the hotels. Those are the people I think government should have targeted for to make their business remain afloat. Because for them, they might have a different kind of customer. Apart from hotels, they might substitute to other places that they can supply. But hotels, we still wait for occupancy. So it beats economic logic on, especially look at opportunity cost for government to put such kind of money to a sector that will revive next year. So that's the question that I think government needs to answer. What is the opportunity cost when you're subsidizing or you're giving money to tourism at this point in time?
Yeah, and from an economist perspective, Tony, this is being caught between a rock and a hard place, because this is the same government that lowered the taxes and from 30 to 25, that's pay as you earn, lowered the VAT from 16 to 14%.
Yeah.
So
yes.
first of all, that has not been felt much on the ground. Why is that? And also, number two, how then do they get revenue when they have sort of given a cushion that denies the same government of the revenue that we're talking about that should have been used to disburse to other people?
Okay, the thing, looking at the position we are today, especially looking at COVID's impact, we cannot talk about, it's not normal economics or normal economic management. We are talking about, people call it wartime economics. It's a wartime economics because you're trying to stabilize the economy from depression or from collapsing. So from that perspective is that you look at how do you stabilize income. The first on the stimulus is providing tax incentives that government provided. You look at those tax incentives, they target people in the formal sector. And our formal sector doesn't carry the bigger load of the employed people. So 70% are employed, almost more than 70% are employed in the informal sector. So very little of it, unless only BET is when they'll benefit. If you talk about income tax incentives, those people are not part of that. So you're targeting a small people, but it's still a good reaction because the most people who are taxed are the people in the informal sector. So that relief was good. But that should be subsidized by a program. Now we talk about a stimulus package that we call a stabilization fund. A fund that stabilizes businesses, a fund that targets people now in formal sector who are outside that bracket of tax incentives. The other one was the monetary package that banks were being able to provide a framework that they can provide more loans at this time, at this point in time. So you look at those three different packages that government needs to roll out at this time. We've seen monetary policy within central bank has been rolled out, but the uptake is not there. So that's the thing about these monetary packages. So you try most of the things to balance so that when you put together, you have to have a bigger program rolling out. So you have to consolidate those three together. The stabilization fund, you talk about monetary and the tax incentive. You have to combine them to have a bigger impact on the economy. So we have seen that the main place that government needs to come is the stabilization fund of funding businesses that are going afloat, are going in depression. So that is the main link to that package, which we have not seen government coming into. So unless government tries to act faster at this point, it will be very hard to revive many businesses. There are businesses who are gone forever, but the main thing is at least save some business for now, so that when we are coming back to economic growth, we have businesses that we can revive and that have remained afloat and they can take off.
So, Tony, yesterday, the president, during the office of the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States, that's the OACPS summit, said that the debt levels in most African countries are now approaching a crisis level. So yes. What is in the long-term effect of COVID-19 to the economy from where you stand? And does that mean then that what we need now is more loans from other countries so that we stabilize our economy as well? How do we balance those two?
Okay. I think what the president said is important and it's very good. That's one of the biggest problems, and especially another Achilles heel for many African governments. Many of them took loans for this period in time about infrastructure development. And those infrastructure development have not have a big dividend to the economy. So you find that you're paying debt, but you're yet to see the dividends or economic dividends at this point in time. You look at currencies that will perform badly. So you talk about your debt servicing costs are moving higher. The thing about this time is that everyone in the world is experiencing the same problem. One of the things that we expected to see African governments is entering into debt rescheduling or debt restructuring programs. So people talk about debt relief. You ask for a moratorium of not paying debt, probably 6 months. Some governments have asked for that so that they may put more emphasis on the money that they will pay debt in trying to stabilize the economy at this point in time. So we expected to see that African governments will come together and try to negotiate with lenders within Africa, bilateral lenders and multilateral lenders, on having a debt relief program, probably a 1 year or 6 month moratorium, so that the little resources you have, you invest back to stabilizing your economy. Or from Kenya's part, they've engaged, I think the Chinese counterpart, they're here to have negotiations about that. But I think we need to have it quite early at this point in time, so that we're able to restructure our loan, so that it fits our fiscal management better, we have a physical headroom to be able to respond to the COVID economic shocks. But for now, the moment we still keep on paying debts and African countries have those debt obligations at this point in time, it means our risk to the economies are continuing to being bigger. And the risk to that is that we find that we don't have much risk to respond to the COVID shocks. So getting out of these will require a lot of resources the more we delay in responding to the economic impact of COVID.
And that's where my concern really is, Tony, because the idea behind a debt is that a country needs to be first able to pay it, and ideally you should invest in something that brings money to the economy. Right now, what we are investing in is more of consumables or recurrent expenditure, if you may, because dealing with COVID-19, we're looking at PPEs, we're looking at paying people who are working to flatten the curve. How then are we able to pay back this debt, or will there be a much deeper ripple effect as time goes by?
Okay, that's a good question. At this point in time, one thing is that you don't invest in development expenditure because it beats logic that you invest in development expenditure when your country is facing an existential threat from a virus that is a global pandemic. So the thing is about stabilizing the economy, and that stabilizing is having liquidity flow, money flow for consumables alone. So that means that even if you're doing a development expenditure, it wouldn't make sense. At least you have to save lives first so that you can talk about development. So we are seeing that those IMF and World Bank are rolling out loans. Most of these loans are not the normal loans to ask for. Those are emergency loans for emergency responses. So most of them are interest-free, and they're only given in response to emergencies. So that is one of the main places that government looks for. Because, for example, you look at Kenya, we don't have the physical overhead to have money outside from our budget to respond to COVID. You will have to look for our outside resources. And so that's where IMF and World Bank comes in with emergency response loans. So you find that those loans terms and conditions are very flexible, not the normal loans. And most there are countries that are low-income countries. For them, they get grants for these loans from these funds that they're getting. It's more of a grant than a loan. So it helps you to respond better because you have outside resources from your constrained budget already, that you're paying high debt servicing cost. You are having a high budget that you cannot finance a lot of things. So going forward, the thing that we need to see is that government renegotiates loans so that in the next 6 months, after we had COVID, you have funds that you can continue to stabilize. Now you talk about economic development, you will have to now look for money out within your budget if you are able to restructure your debts. But with that not happening, I think we are continuing to dig the hole deeper, that we cannot come out of this problem the way we expect.
And so from an economist perspective, what is the long-term effect of the demand and supply chain of this particular pandemic that we are going through right now? Because especially in real estate, for example, we've seen a lot of auctions being put on the papers, people being auctioned left, right, and center, the prices either dipping. There are those who are arguing that after this, there will be a buyer's market for the few who have the money. Is that necessarily true, or will this just hold for now?
I think the perspective depends on how you're looking at it for those who are saying that. Let's start with demand. We're talking about demand on an aggregate level. So that's a whole macroeconomic level. Income shocks has been serious. Businesses don't have cash flows. You talk about individuals have lost jobs. So it means you have depressed income for people to be able to buy things here and there the way they used to be. So that's disposable income. So people don't afford the basic things that they used to. So you only buy the things that you need for now. That is the demand side of the shock, of the COVID shock. So we find that people don't have income, and most of them will just be buying for necessities out of that. So the long-term effect is that government will need to find proper policies on terms of job creation and stabilizing businesses going forward, so that the more companies come up, more foreign and development investments come in, you're able to employ more people. So you find that you have to create policies that you bring more people in the labor market. From the supply side, we find that supply chains have collapsed. And the thing is that it's not unique to Kenya, but it's a global problem. So we find that linking economies will be the biggest problem. But for now, the outcome is that we will get back to where we are trading levels we are. A few things will happen, especially like import substitutions, that many countries will try to diversify their trade links, especially China, so that you don't depend a lot from the Chinese market. So we find that many countries will try to substitute that with local manufacturers. So in terms of supply chain, on the long-term effect, is that we will get back to where we are. But the issue will be, it depends also the balancing of the demand side of the economy, where people have income to be able to supply, to be able to afford the supply that are coming in. But for, the last bit about you're saying auctions and all that, I think we are in a situation where we cannot say that there's a buyer's remorse to that extent, because everyone, generally, the economy is in a recession. Construction. So the main word is construction and recession. Recession means a little bit different. But if you're in contraction, very few people can afford. But even those few people are in a precautionary state, waiting to see how things happen. So they don't have money to invest at this point in time because of uncertainty of the future. So going forward is that those are the people maybe can talk about buyer's remorse. But the thing is that since it has happened at aggregate level, even if banks were to auction your house, who will they find the buyer quite easy? So you'll find that banks will try to negotiate with people about their mortgage facilities and other loan facilities, because there is no one that banks will work with, because their main business is about debt selling, selling debt. If you don't find more people sustainable, you'll have to negotiate with them so they're able to be sustainable and still have them on your loan books. So going forward, banks will still have the leeway to be able to negotiate with people and have better terms to discuss with their customers.
So with all the factors that you just mentioned there, Tony, then, is it prudent to spend 600 million on the Buy Kenya, Build Kenya sort of allocation that has been put by the 8-point economic stimulus plan announced by the president? Is that the area of investment at this time, or should we lower our cost of production first so that we make our products more competitive?
That's one of the main things I faulted in that stimulus. Because when you talk about Buy Kenya, Build Kenya, in a market it's demand and supply. So government has decided that they want to incentivize that sector by them investing 600 to cars. I don't see the impact of that apart from companies that will supply to government on that scale. So probably a few companies will be able to get that contract. But you're not really talking about a Buy Kenya, Build Kenya from a bigger scale. Many Kenyans are participating. So at this point in time, that was not something that you say in response to influencing the Buy Kenya, Build Kenya. Though the money 600 to government is a drop in the ocean, so it's something that they can squeeze within their budget and incentivize. But looking at that, it's not a bigger policy, a robust policy that can say incentivizes Buy Kenya, Build Kenya, and revives that policy sector, especially about local manufacturing. That's a small incentive. So if you're talking about Buy Kenya, Build Kenya, you talk about manufacturers and producers. You'll have to find that producers have to access their supply chains, especially most of them import intermediate goods. So they assemble here in Kenya and then they sell it in Kenya. So those trade links have to open first when you talk about those Buy Kenya, Build Kenya. The people who will be in business are people who produce goods that are of necessity today, the basic things, the food stuff, and talk about like the PPEs and all that. Those are the people who remain strongly in business. But for the other people, if you talk about a Buy Kenya, Build Kenya, that policy can only come into effect if we're able to contain the COVID-19 on a global scale. So probably the world has received a vaccine, and so everyone now talks about moving out of the COVID-19 pandemic. So that's when you can talk a policy like Buy Kenya, Build Kenya can work from that point of view.
So, Tony, are we going to achieve the 6.2% GDP growth that we projected?
No, I think that one everyone is in agreement, even Treasury are in agreement that we will not get anywhere close to that. We will be between 1% to 2%. So economies are losing around 4%. As African economies are losing around 4% of the economic growth. The economies like South Africa, will be negative growth. In fact, it means the economy will contract. So even if for us at 1%, it means 1% growth. It means I think we are doing better. So the sad reality is that one, the economy is in depression because supply chains have been cut off. So we are cut off from the global market that where we expect a lot of earnings, export earnings that have an impact about foreign direct investments, foreign direct remittance. We talk about a lot of things that the way we are interconnected to the global world has been cut off. So we talk about the lockdown effects locally. There are many SMEs that cannot be operational because of those lockdown effects. So those are serious economic shocks that we can talk about, that we cannot say that we will be able to meet economic growth or the targets of 6%. Even if we review the next year that we are out of this in the next financial year, getting to 6% will still be the hardest thing that we'll ever try.
All right. I guess that's where we leave it for now, Tony. That's Tony Watima, is an economist. We are talking at a time when there's a projection of a loss of about 28 billion to 50 billion per month for the next 2 years. That's according to the Institute of Economic Affairs. How we survive this, we will see. It's based on what the government will do in terms of stabilizing the economy. So we're taking a quick break here. When we come back, we'll be speaking to Jerome Ochieng. He's the PS for ICT at a time of where innovation has been touted as one of the best ways of us to come out of where we are. We'll talk to him in just a bit.